Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Internationalie podcast. Before we start, let me talk a little bit about the podcast. So, the Internationalie podcast is going to be a space where different international students, prospective ones, as well as current international students, could get a glimpse into the life of international students in the US or abroad. This week, I am joined by my very different Stuti. Welcome to the show, Stuti.
Thank you so much, Ruth. It's so
Yeah.
lovely to be here.
Oh, I'm so glad. I'm so glad. Thank you. We're finally doing this. So before we delve into our conversation and into this episode, let me talk a little bit about you and your background. So, Stuti is from Gurgaon, India, and was an international student at Smith College in Western Massachusetts. She majored in quantitative economics with a minor in statistics and data science, and graduated in 2022. She currently works in the international development space at the Abdul Latif Jameel Poverty Action Lab, or JPAL, and is based in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Would you like to add more to your bio?
No, that sounds great, and I'm sure we'll find out more about each other through this conversation.
Great, great, awesome. So, as the topic of our episode today is dealing with discomfort, what is the first thing that comes to your mind when you hear the word discomfort?
I think discomfort is just anything that arises out of an unfamiliar environment, and
Mm-hmm.
it can be physical, it can be emotional, it can be mental. And I think being an international student is a lot about being picked up from what is probably familiar to you and being
Mm-hmm.
put in a situation which is completely unfamiliar, whether it be the people around you or the culture around you, the languages
Mm-hmm.
around you.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Everyone comes from different backgrounds. They look different. They speak differently, and
Mm-hmm.
they've been brought up differently. They've been brought up in different cultures, and hence they probably think differently as well.
Yeah.
Um, so that's just a lot of diversity, so to say,
Mm-hmm.
in what you suddenly sort of are faced with, which
Mm-hmm.
leads to discomfort, which leads to an unfamiliar environment.
Yeah, no, for sure. When I hear the word discomfort, I think the first thing that comes to my mind, like in talking about international students, I feel like we go through a lot of experiences that make us uncomfortable.
Hmm.
As you mentioned, like moving to a new country, being surrounded by different people. There are so many instances where we are faced with situations that we're not used to before. So, discomfort is a very common feeling that we feel throughout our college journey as an international
Hmm.
student. So, I
Yeah.
wanted to ask you, what were some of the instances or moments that made you feel, discomfort?
Yeah, I think let's start with the more superficial, the physical discomfort. Um, I think it's easier to recognize immediately. So that can be weather, let's say, because personally I came from a place where the weather it's I come from Delhi, so it's very hot in the summers and winters are cold, but
Mm-hmm.
there isn't snow and there isn't like negative temperatures like the way you face in Northampton, Massachusetts.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I think that was the first discomfort, let's say. Suddenly you're in extreme temperatures.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Then the other thing which really stands out to you immediately is the diversity in a town like Northampton, right? Because
Right.
you came from a place where people looked more or less like you.
Mm-hmm.
And then you come to a place where that is not true.
Mm-hmm.
It's a small suburban town in the United States of America. Um, so that's the first thing that hits you. And then, but also because you're part of this international student body, you see people from across the world.
Mm-hmm.
So that's another card that discomfort plays. Um,
Yeah.
so those were the first couple of things. And then, of course, you're in an environment where the educational system is very different.
Mm-hmm.
So you also have to understand what classes you have to take and what goes into those classes and how to talk to professors, because it's
Mhm.
not like it's not like the typical school environment where you come from.
Yeah,
So that's
exactly.
another change that you face. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. So what? While you were talking, I was also like nodding my head because you talked about the weather being different,
Hmm.
diversity, the educational system being different. So let's talk about the weather. Honest, first
Hmm.
of all.
Yeah.
So I come from Ethiopia. So Ethiopia is, I mean, it's a tropical area. I mean, we have,
Hmm.
like it doesn't snow here. It's usually warm, and then there are rainy seasons. So like that, I grew up in an environment where, the weather was, not too extreme, not too hot, not too cold. Just in the middle. And then you go start living in a place like Northampton, where sometimes the temperature, goes down to like negative, okay, this isn't Fahrenheit, but I remember one day walking to class and it was like negative 20 something Fahrenheit, and they still made us walk to class. Like they didn't even cancel class. And it's super cold and it's snowy and it's wind, and like the weather was just something that I had to adjust. Like my skin would change colors, like it was ridiculous. What was the most difficult part of the weather for you as an international student?
I have to say, I really enjoyed the snow the
Okay,
first
great.
couple of times.
Yeah.
But the stress starts when it rains on the snow and then it's slush. And then
Oh
you're
yeah,
like,
yeah.
this is absolutely disgusting.
Yeah.
Um, but I think talking about the weather, I think the cold was a lot of discomfort, to put it
Yeah.
lightly.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It's extreme temperature. So I one day I washed my hair and I walked out for my 9 a.m. class. And by the time I reached Sealy, which was where my economics class was happening, my hair was frozen. And I was like, what did I do? Obviously, throughout this walk, I felt extremely cold. I'm feeling like my brain is freezing and my ears
Yeah.
are freezing. Um, I think you also learn through experience
Mm-hmm.
the equipment you need, whether it be woolen caps or
Mm-hmm.
winter coats, like thick socks, rain
Yeah.
boots, snow boots.
Yeah.
So those were things that were also a journey in their own senses, because
Yeah.
looking for the right snow boots, looking for the right
Yeah.
jackets is something you need to do and figure out yourself. And
Mm-hmm.
there's definitely a lot of support you get, especially at Smith.
Yeah.
Uh, but it is something that you finally have to figure out and make decisions
Yeah.
about, which honestly brings me to my next discomfort, which might just be financial discomfort sometimes.
Let's talk
Um,
about that. Yeah.
yeah, because we all come from countries where we're trying to sometimes convert currency. So
Yeah.
for me, it was whenever I spent $1, I said, okay, I'm spending 75 rupees,
Oh my God.
which which is just different when
Yeah.
you like start thinking about that, and
Yeah.
it dawns on you that I could buy a packet of chips for 5 rupees in India, but over here I have to buy it for $1 or $2, which is 150 rupees. So
Wow.
those are things that really hit you hard in the
Yeah.
beginning, especially
Yeah. Yeah.
when you're just here and your campus job has just started, but you're still converting because that's your that's a huge discomfort, and I think it really plays on your mind. It's always at the back of your mind, and you're always subconsciously thinking about it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, for sure. I completely relate with that. But you know what?
Mhm.
I figured out like trying to like convert into Ethiopian birr was like driving me crazy because as you said, like the US dollar and the Ethiopian birr, like they don't match. Like there's a huge disparity between the exchange rates. Like it stopped making sense to me, and it
Mhm.
was stressing me out. Like I'm spending this much money, but at the same time, I had to like teach myself that okay, this is a different country, it's a different currency. I can't
Mhm.
compare it to like back home, because it's a different instance. But yeah, it is
Yeah.
definitely something that comes up to your mind a lot of times, and it does bother you a lot because
Mhm.
for that amount of money you could do so much more back home. But yeah, no, definitely, like finances is a big discomfort. Yeah, for sure.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. So and then the other discomfort you talked about was about diversity. So let's talk about that. So for me also, I grew up in Ethiopia, spent, all my, young adult youth childhood here. So I grew up with, people who looked like me, like went to school with people who looked like me. So everyone was the same. And then all of a sudden, you're in college where you meet people from all walks of life. They're from different countries, and it's a bit overwhelming, to be honest, to be surrounded by so many people
Hmm.
from different countries.
Yeah,
But I want to hear about your experience. How was that for you?
absolutely. And I think you definitely are suddenly meeting a lot of people who don't look like you, speak like you, are from different diverse backgrounds. But what that also does is that makes you question what your identity is. So, and that makes you look at yourself very differently because
Yeah.
suddenly you're like, okay, this person identifies as someone from this region of the world, and it it's at least from where I come from, the identities we hold are stronger in terms of the relationships we have with the people around us, the
Mm-hmm.
class, the gender, um, and I think in recent times, even the religion. But I think when you come to the US, a lot of emphasis is given on your race, your ethnicity,
Yeah.
your sexuality, and even your gender.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and suddenly you're introduced to all of these new isms, and um, there's just so many new identities that not only apply to you, but people prescribe to you almost because you weren't aware of those, which was, I have to say, one of my biggest shocks. And it continues to be one of the things that I question most is
Yeah.
holding this identity of a POC, which is a person of color.
Mm-hmm.
Um, because that's something that I had never heard of before I came to the US, never even thought of.
Yeah.
Look similar to you, and that spectrum might range, that
Mm.
the color might be a spectrum, but it's largely that you're brown people, but then suddenly that's the first time you're told that you're a brown person, because I'd never really thought about that.
Yeah.
So suddenly you're this person of color, and I came to Smith, and people were like, "Oh, you should go for the PO cheese," and I'm like, "What's the PO cheese?" So PO cheese is like a
Yeah.
POC. It's when Smith College is funding some snack time or tea time,
Yeah.
with other people of color and trying to build that kind of community within houses or within
Mhm.
certain organizations on campus. So that was a little bit of a truckload for me, very honestly, because I
Yeah.
said,
Yeah.
okay, so you're telling me that I'm a person of color, and
Yeah.
then you follow that up with saying people of color in the United States are oppressed communities.
Yeah.
And suddenly you're telling me that I'm an oppressed community rather than me,
Yeah.
figuring that out for myself.
Yourself. Yeah.
So I don't know. I just, that, like, those identities that I didn't hold before coming here, but
Yeah.
were almost put on me, and I want to say forced on me,
Mm-hmm.
were a huge discomfort for me and continue to be a huge discomfort for me.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, thank you so much for raising this really important aspect of discomfort, Stuti, because even for me, like before I went to Smith, I had no idea what POC was. And so like all of a sudden it was like, okay, I am a person of color in the US. Okay, what's next? Oh, I am black. Okay, great. But I didn't grow up in the US, right? So for me,
Mhm.
I my whole life I was Ethiopian, but when I went to the US, I was a black person. And so I had to
Mhm.
accept that identity and like navigate for myself what that meant for me living in the US and in that
Mhm.
space. And I've seen a lot of international students also grapple with that idea where their identity is sometimes just given to you. People just put you in a box just because you're
Mhm.
from a certain country or you look a certain way or just because your skin color and your skin tone is not, a certain shade. Um,
Yeah.
so these are all experiences that we have as international students and that we share where it could be very uncomfortable, because imagine like growing up somewhere else completely, and then you go to another place and all of a sudden you are this and this and this. So that could be very, very challenging, especially, you're a young person, trying to, I mean, most of us when we entered college, we were 17, 18 years old. So
Mhm.
we're still, trying to figure it out, what is life at that point, you know what I mean? So when you're faced with all of these questions, I feel like it adds to the pressure that international students face, and also like the
Absolutely.
challenge is also shared, so yeah, I mean, this
Yeah.
definitely,
And
yeah.
yeah, and I think it's also true. I think the what I would like to say here though is we it's worth noting that we do enter a space which is not ours.
Yeah.
So to some extent, the communities in the United States which are brown or black or whatever ethnicity or race they identify with, they've had very different experiences than we have as international students in countries that we've been the majority in. Um, so that is worth noting because I think it's a journey, and I think we're still, even after almost 6 years in the US, I'm still grappling with that, trying to understand better what experiences of um, Indians or South Asians um, and like
Yeah.
identities that I hold, what their
Mm-hmm.
experiences have been when maybe their first generation in the US or their
Mm-hmm.
parents moved and they've been born and brought up here. So these are it's always very important, I think, and I've learned this to have that in mind because initially I was like, I'm absolutely not a POC. Stop giving me this identity, but then you over time you realize why this is an identity and why it's
Mm-hmm.
important for you to accept it, even if you don't want to be part of it very aggressively or very like blatantly, because these are experiences, these are things that have been shaped out of experiences of people who've been brought up here.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And I feel
Hmm.
that's a very good point that you're bringing, because I feel like it takes another level of understanding to appreciate the historical aspect of, how a lot of people in the US came to be, how immigrants,
Hmm.
Black people, even Native Americans, I think it requires a certain level of understanding the history of the US to be
Hmm.
able to really appreciate our experience as international students. Because if it wasn't for, the people that came before us, and the
Hmm.
struggles that they faced, and the achievements that they,
Hmm.
achieved in fighting for their rights, we wouldn't have had the same educational opportunity,
Absolutely.
to go to the US and study there, right? So I feel like that's a very good point that you brought up. It really requires us to like go back and look at history and appreciate where people were
Hmm.
born. But at the same time, um, I feel like when you're faced all of a sudden with that kind of
Hmm.
identity crisis almost,
Yeah.
you need also another, support system, other international students who are going through it. So for me personally, like, I had other international students where I could talk to about what I was facing in class, or whatever I was facing, I had people to talk to, and I feel like that made it easier for me. And I wanted to ask you, like, what were some of the things that made it easier for you to deal with these discomforts?
Absolutely. And I think I always say this when people ask me about being an international student. I always say that, and I can only speak for Smith, but I think we have such a strong international student body and in an international office, international
Yeah,
scholars office that sticks by us because the thing that we bond over the most is that we need to find ourselves in this so unfamiliar.
yeah,
I mean, with the expectation of having to find ourselves, figure it out, and we bond over that unfamiliarity is why we're, I
yeah,
think, so strong. And that's
yeah,
exactly what you said, right? Like, it's that student body, it's that international student body that really comes through when you need it, whether it be you having a bad time in class or having or honestly sometimes going through implicit
Mm-hmm.
biases where you feel like you've been put in a position because of your race or your ethnicity, but it's not very obvious. So you are left questioning yourself and you're left questioning what just happened.
Yeah.
And that really it takes a toll on you because you question your own identity and what you know and what your values are rather than actually seeing it for what it is, which is people prescribing things to you
Yeah.
or assuming things about you sometimes.
Yeah.
Um, and those are times of great discomfort, but it's your friends who've also been through it, it's your seniors who've been through it and overcome it in some senses, or at least are now familiar with that feeling of discomfort. Um, who tell you that it's honestly it's not you, it's just the environment you're in, and
Yeah.
you'll figure it out, or you learn to understand or take it for what it is.
Yeah, 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 for sure. And even just having someone to validate your feelings, that's
Mhm,
like a huge relief, right? Because a lot of times we feel like we're going through the experience alone. Which, at some point there are individual experiences that we have,
mhm,
that we don't share. But at the same time, like when we share those discomforts with someone who might have an idea about it, just the fact that they're there to listen to us and validate what we're feeling, I feel like
mhm,
that just goes a long way. Because for instance, for me, like when I talk about my struggles about being an international student at Smith, a domestic student might not be able to understand what I'm talking about, right? But if I
mhm,
talk to another international student, even though they don't go through the exact same experience, they have an idea of what I'm talking about. So having that support system, for me personally, that was a huge benefit. Because I mean, if it wasn't for my friends at Smith, like honestly, I don't think I would have graduated. Because there were so many things that happened. It's not just school. It's not just classes. There's a lot of social aspect that comes with being a student, a college student
mhm.
specifically. So yeah, for sure, definitely, like having that support system is really really important. Yeah.
Yeah.
Would you like to
And
add more to that? Yeah.
I think, and this is more of a personal experience, and you're
Yeah.
part of that. And I don't know if you remember this, but
Yeah.
I think it was 3 weeks in or 3 months in maybe.
Yeah.
And I was, of course, I'd thrown myself into a number of organizations at that point and trying to just
Yeah.
do everything I could. But it finally does catch up to you when you start feeling, and when you honestly, when you come into an undergrad, at least for me, this was true, you're all like bright eyed and
Yeah.
bushy tailed, and you're like, this is
Yeah.
all great, it's all sugar coated, and you're in this wonderful, quaint town of Northampton, and it's
Right.
lovely. But then you start, as you dig in deeper and you're part of more things, more
Mm-hmm.
realities sort of start hitting you. And it was in one of these moments of reality, and I forget if it was 3 weeks in or 3 months in,
Right.
but I was sitting in the Ziskin dining hall,
Yeah.
and I was in absolute I was in shambles internally, and really just couldn't contain it anymore. And I
Yeah.
was like, I can't do this here. I went to keep my plate, and you were also there, just
Yeah.
keeping your plate and going to leave the dining hall. And I saw
Right.
you, and you were a familiar face. You were part of that international student community that
Mm-hmm.
um, I I identified most with, and I felt most comfortable around.
Yeah.
And it was in that moment that I just could not contain that feeling of being overwhelmed anymore.
Right.
I, I just couldn't. And some of these things that happened, some some identities had been given to me, some
Yep.
implicit biases had been felt, and it was just really catching up to me.
Yeah.
And I just remember breaking down in the skin while I kept my plate, and you were right there. And I saw you, and I just hugged you, and I just like continued crying for like 5 minutes. And you were like, "It's gonna be okay." And the truth of the matter is, as much as I had liked to tell you what had happened, I did not understand it myself,
Yeah. I
and
remember.
that's what happened. Yeah, okay, you do
Yeah,
remember.
I do remember. Yeah.
Oh, and I think that's what happens, right? Like it's you yourself don't know how to process the feelings you're feeling because they're unfamiliar to you
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
sometimes, and that's discomfort.
Exactly. Exactly. Thank you so much for sharing that, Stuti, because
Mhm,
I specifically remember that moment, honestly, because yeah, we were in Ziskin dining hall. I was, we had finished dinner and I saw you, and when I saw you, I just recognized there was something wrong. Like
mhm.
just your face, there was something wrong, but I knew you couldn't articulate it. So I was like,
Yeah.
let's just hug, and I started hugging you and you started crying. I was like, oh my god, because I also went through your shoes. I also had a very difficult time my first year. And
Mhm,
so I feel like at that point what I was feeling was like, even though I don't understand 100% what this girl is going through, I
mhm,
also share 100%
mhm.
what you're going through. So like I
Yeah.
just, you just needed someone, a shoulder to cry on. And I feel very privileged to be able that, to be that person for you in that moment.
Mhm.
And yeah, we just shared a moment, you cry, and then all of a sudden you're like, I'm okay now, thank you. And then you left. And I had no idea what happened, but I knew that I was there when you needed me. So I felt like I did something good. But
You
that's
did, you did.
yeah, but that's like, the perfect example to
Mhm,
showcase how discomfort could really affect us. And like you said, like you couldn't even tell me because you're still processing it and you don't know what's going on, right? So it comes to a point where even though we think, and especially Smith, where people are very competitive and they all act like,
mhm.
I got this together. I'm the president of 5 clubs. Yeah, I'm taking all these hard classes and I get 4.0 GPAs. Where
Uh-huh.
surrounding yourself with those kinds of people also gets to you at some point, because
Yeah.
it could be quite a challenge to keep up that persona while you're crumbling on the inside, right? So
Mhm.
I feel like, when you're put in a space where people are very competitive and people expect a lot from you, and then especially you're involved with a lot of things and there's just so many expectations, it could feel
Yeah.
very overwhelming. And that's also normal. Like I guarantee you at some point some person has experienced what you've experienced. They were just not brave enough to like articulate it or like try to figure it out.
Yeah.
Yeah, no,
Yeah,
for sure.
absolutely. And I think over time we build a community, build coping mechanisms around it, and
Yeah,
we build a support system at Smith, beyond Smith, even
yeah,
at home
yeah,
um, with friends, with family, that support us in those moments and are just there when you need them to be there. And sometimes it's people who you don't expect. Like I really needed you to be there that time, and you were
yeah,
there. Just
right.
you don't know what comes along, but I think
Yeah.
over time you figure it out, and people
Hmm.
around you help you do that.
Yeah.
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 Uh,
Mm-hmm.
but those are discomforts. I think talking about the Ziskin dining hall, though, let's talk about food because
Okay,
that was
great. Food. Amazing. Let's talk about it.
because that was a huge discomfort for me because
Hmm.
I think also just food in the United States is,
Yeah.
I want to say, built different. It's just
Hmm.
built different in the sense that chicken in the United States versus chicken in India is just different. I don't know. I don't know the specifics of how they grow it, how they manufacture it,
Yeah.
how they keep the chickens, but
Yeah.
it's just different. The milk is different. Um, when you come to Smith, you're suddenly lactose intolerant. Or not Smith, to the United States. It's not a
Yeah.
Smith.
You
Smith
didn't even know what
specifically.
that was. Right.
But suddenly milk is different and vegetables are different and fruits don't taste the same. And you're left wondering how I left planet Earth because that's all you knew. And then suddenly there's the same cherries that taste different, the
Yeah.
same melons that taste different.
Yep.
So that was a huge point of in the spirit of
Yeah.
discomfort for me. That was a huge
Yeah.
discomfort because like also when you're in a dining hall, they're cooking food for 300 people, 200,
Right.
like 500 people.
Yeah.
Um, and which means that it's not always the best, but you've
Quality.
come, here
Right.
you are. Yeah, but here you are from, at least for me, this was true. And I know a lot of have lived alone for that or have different
Hmm.
experiences. But in my case, I'd come right out of home, um, where I was having home food, and suddenly
Yeah.
there was chicken that was uncooked sometimes. And I remember there was one time where I sort of broke into my chicken and blood squirted on my face, and I was like, "This is." I'm sorry to
Oh,
be so graphic.
no worries. But wow.
I
Okay.
was like, "What have I just? What have I witnessed?"
God. Oh my God. Oh my God.
And like, you can tell the dining people working at the dining halls, but that. Well, anyways, moving on.
Yeah.
It's just there's it's not the same food, and there's different flavors. Sometimes, especially, I think a running joke amongst South Asians will be that this is not spicy and this is very bland. And I think a
Right.
lot of people from a lot of other regions of the world as well,
Yeah, for
because we're
sure.
just used to different spices and different kinds of usages of those spices.
Right.
So all of this definitely piles up. And I think when you're there day in and day out, trying to study, trying to keep your
Hmm.
energy levels high, also doing like 80 other different things.
Yeah.
Food is very important, but sometimes it you can't eat it, and sometimes it's so different for you that it's what bothers you the most during the day because you can't even look forward to
Mm,
that one meal sitting with your friends that you can not think about discomfort. But that doesn't
yeah.
happen because
Yeah.
it's different and it's not
Yeah.
always what you want.
No.
Um,
Yeah.
so,
Food, man. Okay. This is a huge. Like I'm very like it hits close to home because I feel like because we both come from countries where like our dishes are like very famous. People love Ethiopian food. People love
mhm,
Indian food.
mhm.
We grew up in an environment. Very lucky to like
Yeah.
be born in this country where we have so many like rich flavor of dishes. So like growing up, my tongue has like well adjusted to like the spice levels, like a wide array of like spices that I'm so used to.
Mhm,
Um, and then you say, you go to the US and like the whole food industry is so different. The way food is
mhm,
made. And then even like the amount of food that's wasted. I remember
mhm.
like there was this whole like, where we at the end of dinner or food, like we would put our plates, the
Mhm.
spoons, the plates, and
Yeah.
then we would just dump our leftovers in this huge bucket. And that would just go to waste. Sometimes they would, I mean, there were like initiatives to like donate it to you know
Mhm,
food recovery network. I remember there was a club on
mhm,
campus, but I mean, I'm sure like they don't do that 100% of the time, and there was just so much food wastage. In Ethiopia you don't waste food. Okay, so like that for me was a huge culture shock too, because here if you're full, there's always someone else willing to eat your plate, or you just give it to the dog or the cat, or at the
yeah.
end of the day, like you don't throw away food, because food
Mhm,
is people respect food. Like there's
yeah.
a lot of respect put up on food. And in the US it was completely different. And even the flavors, I remember walking into the dining hall feeling so hungry, and I just look at the options and I'm like, I can't eat anything, but I have to force myself to eat something because I, I have to survive. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I associate food with comfort. So whenever I used to like, and there weren't a lot of Ethiopian restaurants. The nearest one was in Hartford, Connecticut, so that was like
Mhm,
maybe once in 6 months I would get to eat
mhm,
Ethiopian food, and that's like maybe like the most amount of Ethiopian food I would eat in a year. And I felt very deprived of the comfort that I've gotten so used to while growing up. And I didn't realize how much of an impact the food I was eating was having on my health, my mental health, like everything connected with it. It had a huge impact on me. And then we started cooking on our own, around like when we started becoming juniors and
mhm,
seniors, like with clubs and stuff. Like I used to attend club meetings just for the food sometimes.
mhm.
I'm like at least there's a guarantee of like authentic, some sort of dish that would
Yeah.
actually like remind me of home. um and yeah, I mean, I'm very like very emotional because food is really important, and it also like breaks my heart because not a lot of people get access to the same types of food, especially international students, that we're used to
Mhm,
while growing up. So it's a huge hurdle that we had to
mhm.
pass through to survive.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
And I think you said it very well. You said food is comfort, and
Yeah.
And when it becomes discomfort, it really throws you off.
It does. It really
And it
does.
and some things that are your comfort zone and are your comfort, they become discomforts when you're an international student. And that is exactly what affects your mental health,
Yeah.
your general, your physical and mental health, very
Yeah.
honestly. Like
Yeah.
what led to, so when the food wasn't good or wasn't to my liking, which started happening a lot in the middle, especially when it's final season and you're anyways really stressed out.
Yeah.
Then what really happens is you're like, you look at the food, you're like, I can't eat this. But what I can eat is this ice cream. And then you just eat,
Yes.
I ate so much ice cream
Same.
in negative, that it's negative
Same.
20 degrees Celsius outside, and I am just eating ice cream for
Yes.
3 meals a day.
Oh my God.
And it, but what this really very realistically does is it completely ruins your health.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I
For
came out
sure.
of Smith with pre-diabetes. I came out of Smith with a billion other like
Yeah. Yeah.
genuine things that I need to fix
Yeah.
in my life now. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
and it's, I don't know whose fault it is. It's not my fault. It's not their fault.
No.
It's just an environment that is different, right? And
Yeah.
some things just become your coping mechanism, and you
Yeah.
try to
Yeah.
find comfort in situations. And those comforts don't always, they're not, everyone doesn't always have healthy coping mechanisms, is the
Yeah.
truth of the matter, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And as much as I would like to undo my eating habits at Smith, it's not going to happen. So I'm
Mm-mm.
stuck with it. I'm stuck with pre-diabetes now.
Oh my God. Yeah. No,
Um,
seriously. Because like when you think about it, it has like a direct consequence on your health. And especially like as a student, you're not really prioritizing your health at that point. You just want to get the, those A's in the classroom, just, moving on day by day. You're not really thinking about what you're putting in your body. And as you said, like not everyone has, healthy coping mechanisms. And ice cream, I used to eat so much. I gained so much weight in college, by the way. Like this was, and like I knew I was gaining that weight, but I was like, I can't do anything about it, because this is the only thing I could eat. And sometimes when I couldn't eat anything in the dining hall, I just used to order pizza, Domino's pizza. Like that was my comfort food. And little did I know that it was not good to eat Domino's every week. Like it's really bad. But I feel like those were like the first couple, 2 years, into college, like trying to figure out what works for you. And then afterwards, I started
mhm,
like um like working out a little bit, with a friend. And sometimes
mhm,
when the food that I would eat, I would exercise and
mhm,
it would go away. But still, I still struggled a lot to like find something that would taste good at least, and
mhm.
edible, like honestly edible. And then downtown the restaurants were very expensive, so I can't eat there every day. Like
Exactly.
it's not
It's not
realistic. So
feasible. Yeah.
it's not at all. But yeah, because now that we have passed through it, and now that we have graduated, we are now realizing the impact it had on our health, and
Hmm.
how much that really affected us. And even like our
Yeah.
performance in school, it would be
Yeah.
affected by the food that we were eating, right?
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
I think so. I was my first year part of the crew team, and that was
Oh,
a lot
cool.
because,
Yeah.
yeah, but it was a lot because if
Yeah.
you're
Yeah.
doing such strenuous physical activity, you need to be eating well. And if you're not doing that, it's not sustainable. Like I
It's not.
genuinely would like end my days absolutely exhausted. And I mean, these were some days because I was obviously aware of the fact that I needed to be eating well if I was doing all this. So I would,
Mm,
on most days, be at Tyler, another
mm.
dining hall, eating
Yeah.
pasta and the chicken.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
but you can't, like, again, final season. If that wasn't going to be my comfort food, I would eat ice cream, and then I would wake up at 4 a.m., go for my practice, um,
Oh,
come back at 7 a.m. absolutely exhausted. And this just creates a cycle of, it's a vicious cycle. So
yeah.
these
Yeah.
are
Yeah.
all things. And like, I think we've passed through it and we now know what not to do. So I
Yeah.
think credit to us learning the hard way, but learning. Uh,
Yeah,
uh,
for sure.
yeah, because I think also as international students, our learning is it's a very accelerated learning. The trajectory or the it's a steep curve. So you learn very fast and you learn a lot of different things.
Yeah.
Um, so I think that's the good part of being an international student. The discomfort it puts you through, you come out
Mhm.
stronger because truly what doesn't kill you makes you stronger.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, of
I don't know
course.
if it's worth the mental health and the physical health, but you come out somewhat stronger.
Yeah.
Um, so definitely kudos to that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. Like honestly, I feel like the lessons that we learn as students, as you said, like there's a huge learning curve as international students because we're still trying to figure out what works and what doesn't. And unless you go through that specific experience, you wouldn't know what works for you, right? So
Hmm.
what worked for me trying to cope with the discomfort might not work for you necessarily, right? So you
Yeah,
everyone has their own specific journeys that they're going through. Um so yeah, no, for sure, definitely. But
absolutely.
I'm so glad we talked about this. Honestly, it's been on my mind so much, and I wanted to talk about it for so long. But it is a big issue that needs to be addressed because a lot of times we overlook the simple fact that what you eat
Hmm.
is very, very important, and how that impacts your performance is something that gets overlooked, but it's a very important aspect of our lives as international students. Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah, for
And I
sure.
think one other thing that came up right now was home, which
Mm.
I'd like to just delve a little bit deeper into. Is we spoke about home food, we spoke about
Yeah, please do.
being
Mm-hmm.
away from home, but I think that connection with home is also a little bit, it's a little bit uncomfortable because
Mm.
so in Hindi you have this saying which is na ghar ka na ghat ka, which essentially means you're not you're not from home, but you're not at home, but you're also not at that riverbank. Essentially saying
Mm.
you're not here, not there.
Mm.
Um, which is a feeling I had a lot, at least in my
Yeah.
first couple of years. And I think it's it's a very unsettling feeling because obviously, as someone who grew up away, you're not an American. You're not going
Yeah.
to fit in here. You're not going to understand the
Mm-hmm.
pop culture references that are thrown so casually when you're in a social setting. But when you go back home, as much as you like to think that you're forever, as much as I'd like to think I'm forever going to be uh, someone from Gurgaon and Indian and the various other identities that I've so strongly held before coming here. Um, the truth of the matter is that you do lose touch with some of the everyday realities of home. It's
Yeah.
it's as sad as it is, and it makes me sad, and it's very uncomfortable for me to think about, and I almost want to not believe it, but it's true. It's if it's not part of your everyday, you are going to be a little out of touch from it.
Mhm.
Um, so I think that really plays on your mind, and it makes you feel like it takes away that sense of belonging that otherwise you wouldn't question.
Mm. Mm.
And what are we and where are we if we don't belong somewhere or if we don't feel like we belong somewhere,
Right.
right? Like
Right.
it's such a big part of
Yeah.
life just to feel belonging that
Mm-hmm.
when that is questioned or you start questioning that, it takes a huge toll on you.
For sure.
And definitely, I think we were lucky to find good friends at
Mm.
Smith and find build a good community. And I had Ekta as well, which was the South Asian
Mm-hmm.
Association on campus. So these were communities and these were support systems we did build for
Yeah.
ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but at the same time, when you're alone in your room, this sense of belonging, because everyone at the end of the day is trying to figure out their own stuff. So at the end
Exactly.
of the day, this belonging question does come up.
Mm-hmm.
It plays on your mind. So that was a big point of discomfort for me.
Yeah.
And
I
now
mean,
I've
yeah.
Yeah, no, I just want to say that I feel like now I don't know if it has changed, but I think I've just come to terms with it. And
Mm.
like now that I'm out of Smith, I've still managed to build a community, and not just like a South Asian community, but a community of a support system around me,
Mhm. Mhm.
which is great. But that sense of belonging, you can, I mean, you can always, on good days, you can look at it like, oh, I belong to two places, and that's wonderful. But also on your bad days, you don't know where you stand.
Mm. No, that's a huge, huge discomfort. Thank you so much for bringing that up, Stuti, because um I mean, like the idea of home and belongingness, I think it's always changing, and especially when you're an international student, you're, struggling to figure out where you are. And as you said, because you left home, you feel like you're missing out on a lot of things, which you
Mhm.
are. You're not there
Yeah,
every day. And then, but at the same time, on the other side of the coin, you're in the US. It's very, unfamiliar. You're missing home. You're trying to like go back to that feeling that brings you, comfort and safety. And then even for a vacation or once in a while, you go back home and you realize that there's this big gap that has been created because you moved to a different country, and you constantly try to fill that gap, but no matter how hard you try, um, you come to the realization that you're just different now, because you were uh, you're in a different environment, and that changed you. And even for me, when I moved back home after graduation, there was a huge discomfort for me. It was
yeah.
really, really hard because it wasn't the same Ethiopia that I grew up in. Now I'm an
Hmm.
adult. There were so many changes that were happening, and
Exactly.
the place that I imagined in my head that I was going to move back to was
Hmm.
non-existent. So that was a hard reality
Exactly.
to face. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, for sure, for sure. And I'm
yeah,
sure a lot of international students would relate with that.
yeah, absolutely. And I think you're right. Like every time I go back home, I am constantly, even though I'm very close to, um, I talk to my parents every day. I talk to a lot of my friends back home often, and just generally my relatives. I'm very close to them, so I do keep in touch. But at
Mm-hmm.
the end of the day, like you said, right, like things
Mm-hmm.
are changing, and you're
Yeah.
not part of that change always. So
Yeah.
when you go back, you're like, oh my God, so much has changed. And I didn't know. But I think to add to that, there are good changes and bad changes.
Mm.
And sometimes what also worries me is there's, so let's take COVID, for example. I was
Mm-hmm.
home for COVID for a year and I took a gap year from college. And I decided to stay back home and I didn't want to do it online. Um, and I was doing a fellowship. So I said, you know what, I'm going to extend it for the year, and just stay here. But
Mm-hmm.
what that made me realize was that there were, of course, it was COVID time and India was really in shambles at the time.
Yeah.
So what it made me realize was that there were also a lot of health issues within my family that were getting exaggerated and exacerbated during that time. And friends were having those issues and family and everyone around me was going through something.
Yeah.
But that made me realize that if I was not at home right now, I would hear about this and I would be stressed about it and I would be away and that would be a whole different demon.
Yeah.
To be so far away from home and not know what was going on and how things were happening. But also when I was there, I realized I could actually contribute productively to helping friends, family, and just neighbors,
Mm.
etc.,
Yeah.
overcome things like that and help my
Yeah.
own family, be there for my own family. And that
Yeah.
really, I don't know, it really struck a chord with me in the sense that I realized that we can live in a very well connected world, but at the end of
Mm-hmm.
the day, if you're away from home,
Yeah.
there is only so much that you're able to do.
Mm.
And the value of me being at home during COVID was invaluable for me. It was
Yeah.
it was very high for me.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, I completely understand what you're talking about. Like, there's a huge difference in like being here physically and like just,
Hmm.
connecting with people through the phone. Like, even for me personally, like because I moved back here, I went through the same struggles that what my family was going through, like, during difficult times I was here, and that for me is a huge blessing, and I'm so grateful for the fact that
Hmm.
I was here to witness all of that. Because as you said, if I was somewhere else, I would feel guilty, I would feel confused, I would be calling 24/7, and like you
Hmm.
wouldn't have that same level of peace as you would
Yeah.
have while you're there.
Yeah.
And that's a huge aspect of
Yeah.
the discomforts that we feel. Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure.
It's a lot of uncertainty. It's a lot of loneliness, and loneliness
Yeah,
is a huge part of being an international student, I
for
think.
sure, for sure.
Um, but yeah, and I think that's a beast of its own. And
Yeah.
um, but
Yeah,
yeah, I think
no, for sure.
I think
Yeah.
time zones are a huge point in that as well, right? I can't sleep early because if if I don't call my parents, then if they call me and don't pick up, then
Mm-hmm.
they'll be all like, "Oh, why is she not picking up? And is she okay?"
Yeah,
etc. etc. So
exactly.
it's like you're always in that. You're always living in two places,
Mm,
and that's that's discomfort.
it
It's a
is.
lot of it's it's disconcerting to be in two places at the
Yeah.
same time and having to show up for people
Mm-hmm.
who are in living in different worlds. And
Yeah.
but I think to our credit, we do it we do it well or not, we do it and we figure it out. And over time do it well also, I think.
Yeah, for sure.
So I think it's as much as many things that I pointed out today and that you pointed out today that are uncomfortable and are called are stressors in our lives. I think
Yeah.
we choose it to some extent. So like a lot of people don't choose it and all of that, but I think in my case I chose it.
Yeah.
Um, and it's a choice that you make sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
It's not all the time. I will acknowledge that, but in
Yeah.
my case it was a choice. And
Mm-hmm.
um so there's a lot of benefit of it.
Yeah.
There's a lot of things that I learn and that I pride myself on having done and having figured out. And they can be the smallest of things, but they can also be the biggest of things. And
Mm-hmm.
something that it's really taught me is how to be a good decision maker and to be a decision maker more than a good or bad decision maker, to be a
Yeah.
decision maker because you're faced with things every day, big and small, that require decisions to be made. And as an international student, sometimes because of loneliness, because of being far from home, you don't have the same support system. So you don't have the same lines of communication or
Yeah.
ease of communication.
Yeah, for
Uh,
sure.
Tap into your sources and resources
Mm-hmm.
to help make those decisions. So you
Yeah.
start learning how to sustain yourself, how to be self-sustained in your decision
Mm-hmm.
making and stick by those decisions, and that teaches
Yeah.
you a lot. I think it's
Yeah.
very valuable.
Very, very much so. And I feel like that also helps you like become the person that you always wanted to become, self-sufficient, self-reliant. You
Mhm.
just grow into that person because of the experiences you have as an international student. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So as we're ending our conversation, do you have any advice for current international students who are dealing with discomfort?
Uh, I think I don't think you can avoid any of these for the most part. I don't think they're avoidable discomforts. I think the biggest thing that you can do for yourself is acknowledge those discomforts and at the end of the day, pat yourself on the back and say it was uncomfortable and I did it anyway.
Yeah.
And um and yeah, I think it makes you brave and it makes you value your relationships with people. And I think that would be my advice. It's like try to try to be kind to others, build build a good support system for yourself, let people rely on you and rely on others and don't be afraid of that. um, and be supportive and find support, ask for
Mhm.
it, um, be active, be proactive about it because it goes a long way when it's an uncomfortable situation. And when
Yeah.
things get bad, I think it's it's very important to ask for help and seek
Exactly.
it, and not
Exactly.
be proactive about it. Yeah. And be,
Mm.
yeah, not just sit with it because it doesn't help you. And
Yeah, for
acknowledge it.
sure.
And yeah, and the things you learn, like actively learn, I think sometimes journal, because it makes you remember what you went through, and then
Yeah.
it helps you come back to it and be like, this is what happened and this is what I thought about it at the end of the day. So maybe
Yeah.
it's helpful. Always
Yeah.
remember. Yeah.
Exactly. No, those are like really great tips. And I 100% agree with what you said.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Stuti, for being a guest and for sharing your experience. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Ruth, for having me. And
Yeah.
always grateful to have known you at Smith and
Aw,
continue to
of course.
yeah.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much, Stuti. So just a last minute housekeeping. Please make sure to go follow the official Instagram page at Internationalie by Ruth. That is LIE. And send an email with your questions or concerns about being an international student to internationallybyruth@gmail.com. Thank you again for tuning in today. I hope you have a lovely week ahead of you and take care of yourselves, everyone. Bye.